Hey, thanks so much for listening to the Ridge Community Church podcast. My name is John. I'm one of the pastors at the Ridge, and our vision is to bring the hope of Jesus into every home. So we want to bring you something hopeful and helpful for your everyday life, whether you've been following Jesus for a while or you're still trying to figure out exactly what you do believe about God. Now, you'll find on this podcast things that'll help with conversations about marriage and parenting and mental health and work, practical things to help you in your faith journey, and a lot more. So whether you're listening to this on your favorite podcast app or you're watching on YouTube, be sure to follow and subscribe so that you don't miss any of the hopeful and helpful conversations. Hey everyone, thanks for listening to this episode of the Ridge Podcast. And I'm excited to share with you the conversation that I got to have with Brodie Swanson, one of the pastors on staff at the Ridge. And we just have a great conversation about how do you get comfortable sharing faith, talking about Jesus with others who don't follow Jesus. And that can be a challenging thing to do. It is a challenging thing to do, and it's a hard thing to get comfortable doing. And sometimes you might never become comfortable doing it. But we have a great conversation about how do you navigate that? How do you gain some confidence? What are some tools that you can start using to have those conversations? And a lot more. This is my conversation with Brodie. Hey, Brodie, thanks for coming on the Ridge Podcast. How's it doing today?
Doing good, John. Thanks for having me on. I always love our conversations.
Yeah, and I always love your background. I love the clubs in the background. Although I'm hearing the weather is not really cooperating for me golf right now.
It's terrible. It's supposed to be really nice tomorrow, and so hopefully we have some good weather, and I get out there and hit on the links a little bit.
Okay, so man, I was trying to think of a clever segue between golf and talking about God, but I could not come up with anything.
We talk to God often when we're golfing. It's really the only hope. So
yeah, lots of prayer in those moments.
Yes, very much so.
That's awesome. Hey, all right. So I'm not gonna try to do a clever segue. I'll just say, our conversation today is really about, hey, how do you get comfortable talking about God, talking about Jesus with other people? And there's a lot to that. And I know that we can probably dive into that whole thing. And maybe I want to start off with just this, you're a pastor, you talk about Jesus a lot. You talk about him from the stage. You talk about him as in like these training, like when you do trainings or with people who already follow Jesus. But there's something different, even for somebody who's gotten training and all that stuff, when you're actually talking to somebody who doesn't follow Jesus. And you're trying to talk to them about God. Maybe you could, what's that difference? Like, how does that feel differently? Is it as natural as just, I just go into my 10-point sermon that I have prepared?
No, not at all. But I think there's some people that think that's the case. Like, you're a pastor, you should be able to just jump right into this and things like that. I think the interesting thing for me is that when I talk from a stage or I talk during a training or there's something online or something, people are expecting me to talk about Jesus. And usually the people that are attending have already given me some sort of benefit of the doubt by the fact that they showed up. And when I step outside of the church and to people that might not have a high value for faith or following Jesus, that's a completely different scenario. And so when from a stage you say, hey, I'm a pastor, there's a little bit of respect given. And out in the community, sometimes when you say I'm a pastor, there's a little bit of like, oh, stay away. And it's fascinating because you want to go back to golf and build a segue on this one is that I will never tell people right off the first tee what I do if we join people, because if that happens, then all of a sudden their conversation starts to change. They don't talk about the same things. I've had people that were just swearing up a storm for the first 9 and decided after 9 to ask me what I do. And then I say I'm a pastor and not another swear word the whole rest of the round, because there's this idea that, there's something different changed in the air. And so I think when you step outside of an environment where it's expected, it's always a little bit more dicey. And to be honest with you, you say, how do you get comfortable? I don't know that you ever really get comfortable. You get more comfortable wading into the waters of conversation, so to speak, and then kind of feeling it out because all those conversations are different.
So has it been like, is it like a time element? Is that just like a reps thing? Is that an experience thing? Were there things that you had to like kind of learn along the way? Like, hey, somebody told me this and I started off trying to talk this way and that didn't go well. So I learned maybe some different ways to do this. What did that look like?
I I started off these type of conversations by doing a lot of talking, and now in these conversations I do a lot of listening, because I don't know that people right away are willing to give you anything, and you really don't know where they're coming from unless you ask a question. So somebody will say, I mean, if they ask me, "Hey, you're a pastor. What's your church like?" or things like that, I will as quickly as possible get to, so what's your experience been with church and what kind of faith do you have? Tell me a little bit about that, because instantly I'm going to know, okay, where are we coming from, and how much do I share that's going to actually be helpful? Because if they're curious, some of it will be helpful and some of it will be way too much. And then there's others where they want to dive down into stuff and they've got a background of church or faith knowledge that isn't actually about following Jesus, but they've got some challenges that they want to work through.
So it almost sounds like, because I'm sure people are coming at it from all different angles when they hear this conversation, right? It almost sounds like you had to go through this process. And maybe you didn't start off there right away, but it almost sounds like there was a point at which you were like, oh, I'm just waiting for them to ask me so I can go off on my spiel that I'm supposed to go off on. Because that's the quotes, the thing to do. And it almost sounds, but I'm sure, I'm guessing that you didn't start there, right? So maybe, okay, this is, I did not prep you for this at all, but maybe you could share, hey, what's your journey been like with talking to people about Jesus?
Yeah, I think there's a difference between when you're a teenager and a kid, the conversation is much more curiosity based. People ask you about that. I think when you get into an adult conversation, you've had to earn the moment for that conversation to come up. And so there's probably been a relationship built and things like that. And so the first one that I had, there was a guy that lived up above us in our first apartment, and ended up inviting him to go to church for a program or whatever. And after the program, he rode home with me, and we sat out in the driveway, and he asked me the question, like a question about faith. And I knew that he had a doctorate degree in microbiology from somewhere in Europe. And so, I mean, there was a lot of history that I knew, and I felt this unbelievable pressure to know everything about my faith that would answer every one of his questions. And after that conversation, I felt so stupid. And I felt like I had completely missed the mark and I hadn't helped him at all. And I think he felt that way too. And so I had to go, is this really what talking about my faith is all about? Is trying to help somebody come to a conclusion that I've come to about a certain set of propositions, presuppositions, anything like that. I mean, just a bunch of bullet points that I aspire to and I believe fully. Do I need to get you there? And it brought me to really go, what do I have to add to a conversation like that? And when I got to that point where I was like, I feel like a total failure and I have to ask myself, what do I have to add to a conversation like that? It really brought me to a much different place in how I talk about my faith. And so you want me to go down into that?
No. Let's dive in that
Okay.
Let's dive into that for a second. So it's like you were asking yourself the question, hey, what do I have to add of value to this person's experience or to their questions? Which I don't think, I mean, that's a good question. I don't think I've ever asked myself that question. Maybe not in those specific words, but that seems like a very helpful thing as like a framework of, what is the thing? And that may be like, what are they really asking? That may be what's the thing that I actually feel qualified to talk about? But what was your result from that question?
Yeah, I think there were a couple of things. The first thing that that I have that might be the only thing that adds value in that moment is my story. And my story is different than their story, of course, but there's going to be some things that are similar enough that they can see themselves in my journey, possibly. Because my story is really the only thing I can speak with authority on. I can speak with authority on things that are in the Bible, but there's a lot of things in there that can get really dicey back and forth because there's a lot of gray. And so, sorry if you're a black and white thinker, I just shook your world up. But anyways, but the thing that I can really speak with authority on is God's involvement in my life and my story at certain points in time and how that's turned out. And if somebody asks me, do you believe in God? Well, yes. And I could go down all of these places in the Bible where it talks about God existing and all these things in theology and all this stuff. And they're going to walk away going, well, that was mildly helpful. I know he's full of opinion. But if I say, yeah, I believe there's a God and here's when he showed up and here's how I know it was him. And it's not every other day. But there's been moments in my life where I knew without a doubt that he showed up and that he's real. Then suddenly that changes the conversation because they're not going to debate me on knowledge or facts. They're going to have to engage with my story and my experience. And that's a whole different conversation. And so I really came to the understanding that my story speaks and things that I believe that I've seen in action in my life speak as well. So that there's verses that came true or verses that really meant something to me and guided my actions in a certain place. And that made a difference in my life. Those are the things I can speak to with authority. I mean, if you want to talk to me about whether creation was real or the flood happened, and I got all sorts of opinions, and I can talk you under a bridge with all sorts of nerd facts, but I don't know that adds value. I think when people are asking spiritual questions, they're asking, if God exists, would he exist in my life too? I'm not going to ask it that way. But if he'll exist in yours, then there's probably a good chance he would exist in mine. So how do I get there? So that's my thought.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's as you're sharing that, I kept thinking about how much I liken that to almost giving like a presentation or a message or whatever you want to talk about. You're talking about something, a topic maybe you're an expert on, maybe you're not, whatever. I feel like the moments that are the easiest, that come most naturally, that people you truly come across most authentic is when you're sharing pieces of your story with people. Mm-hmm. And I know without a shadow of a doubt, no one has ever come to me afterwards, and said, "Hey, John, after a message, I loved your 3 points on this." No one has ever done that. Now, maybe it's because the 3 points were good. Who's to say, right? But almost always somebody will come and talk about, wow, when you shared this part of your story, when you shared about this thing in your family, even if it's something silly and funny, and I'm thinking about student ministry, I was like, when you told the story about the barbecue sauce and chicken nuggets, I still remember that, and it's, even if it's a ridiculous thing, the story and the life change, how it affected you is the thing that carries the most weight because it is probably the thing that matters most to you too.
Yeah. Well, and it's where theory became reality. Yeah. And that matters because most people who are approaching faith from a question answer standpoint are looking to engage their intellect. Yeah. And when you say, hey, I'm not going to debate your intellect, I'm actually going to engage your heart, then it changes the way that they perceive stuff. And if I could see God in my life at a heart level, then maybe they could see God in theirs at a heart level.
So to kind of really merge this really well with the idea of being comfortable talking about God, is it fair to say then that there's, in order to do that and take a step in that direction, there's almost some, I'll call it homework or pre-work to do before you're in a place where you want to share those things? And I don't mean necessarily homework in terms of, I need to learn more external knowledge, but more so thinking through why do I want to share this stuff? Mm-hmm. What would be the most impactful thing for someone to share to me? What is my story? Those types of questions asking yourself, would be really helpful to think through beforehand.
Yeah, I think the other question that I would ask myself is, do I know what I believe?
Hmm.
And am I comfortable telling somebody else that I actually believe in something of faith? And the reason I
Hmm.
say that is because I think that, so I've got a guy that lives on my street, and he had a
Yeah.
really, really bad experience with the Lutheran Church when he was a teenager and is very anti church. And it took me a long time to even be able to say, hey, I'm a pastor in a church because instantly I am now associated with something that caused him pain.
Yeah.
And so am I comfortable enough saying, yes, I'm a person of faith, but I may not be the type of person of faith that you encountered at some other point in your life. I'm me. I'm different. And do I feel comfortable enough inside of me to not self-edit while I'm talking about that? Does that make sense?
Yeah. It sounds like there's this, man, almost call it fear, like a hesitation or a
Mm-hmm.
fear of, okay, how will my relationship with this person change
Mm-hmm.
if they know that I follow Jesus?
Yeah.
And I know that comes across in a way, that can be really heavy. And it's a really hard question because I think that the natural reaction we all want to say is no, of course not. I have this faith and I'm not ashamed of it and all those things that come with. Um, but I think there's a real honesty, there's that knowledge that each of us has that this may impact my relationship. And it's
Mm-hmm.
not out of a fear or a shame of following God, but as a hesitation of how that might impact your relationship. Is
Sure.
that a
Yep.
fair assessment of that?
Yeah, I think it is, and I think there's a group called Christ Together that did some research, and I'll botch the actual percentages here, but basically they said that most people that are followers of Jesus, probably 70 to 80%, it's right in that way. Um, they are not hesitant to share their faith because they are not prepared or equipped. They're hesitant to share their faith because they're kind of waiting for permission.
Yeah.
They feel like in a conversation or in a relationship, do I have permission to do this? Am I stepping over a line? Am I saying something that might permanently affect something, or am I saying something that's just going to plain be offensive to somebody else? I think that's a telling statistic to say most people that follow Jesus feel equipped to say something. They just don't know if they have permission to, because of the way our culture has built its interaction with faith and absolutes. And you can't say that what you believe is actually the thing to believe, and so you're waiting for permission. And then I would go with the second level, is to say, if I have permission, if I feel permission to express my faith, then there's a second level of permission that might actually even be harder, and that is the permission to say, yes, I have faith, and here's where it seems crazy to me, and I have some doubts, and I'm still trying to figure it out. And I think
Mm.
that second level of permission almost feels like, oh, am I being a traitor to Jesus because I don't have it all figured out and it's not perfect in my head and I'm still wondering and I'm still struggling and I'm still wrestling. I think those are the things that it's not about having enough knowledge. Sometimes it is. It's not about knowing what I believe. Sometimes it is. It's about the permission to express it and the permission to say, I don't know everything and I still struggle with it. And yet this is my choice on how I'm going to live my life.
Mm. How do you, maybe this two-parter, how do you get permission?
Uh-huh.
And then how do you know you have permission?
Whew. Okay, you didn't ask me this question. So how do you get permission? How do you know you have permission? I think it's okay. So I think it's the same way that happens in politics. When when
Ooh.
when politics comes up, so politics and religion are pretty equal when it comes to how they're perceived to be difficult in relational
Yeah.
situations. And the way that I'll normally do it is I'll create space for there to be freedom for more than one opinion. And so when somebody says something, I'll be like, well, everybody gets to believe what they want to believe, but here's what I believe, and kind of here's why. And then you kind of let the response go. It's not a 10-minute moment. It's like a 12-second moment of saying, hey, this is how it works for me. And then you kind of feel out what the response is. If people go, oh, that's nice, and then they change the subject, okay. you know that's not the moment. But if somebody gets curious and says, "Oh, that's interesting. I always grew up thinking it was like this," or "Hey, somebody told me it was like this," or "I think this," then you've got a dialogue. And as long as that dialogue seems to be easy and beneficial, then I think you have permission. I don't think we ever have permission to tell people what they should believe. I grew up in churches where we would go out and knock on doors on Wednesday nights before church, and we would tell people what they needed to believe and what the consequences were if they didn't believe like us. And I don't think we ever have permission to do that. That's not my journey. That's not my story. My job is to say, hey, here's something that might be helpful within the context of a helpful relationship. And then the Holy Spirit takes what I have to offer and does what he wants with it.
What helped you turn a corner with that?
Lots of mistakes.
Yeah.
I did it poorly a lot of times. And when you do it poorly a lot of times, you finally get to the point where you're like, well, I can't screw it up any worse than I did last time. So I think I'll think through it. There's probably some learnings I need to have from that, some words that would be more helpful, some ways of taking a gentle approach instead of a, hey, let's dive into the deep end, and a realization of myself. I enjoy the Bible. I enjoy the depth that's there. I enjoy the research that's around that. And if I'm enjoying it, most people are not. And that's what I have to realize is I need to know me and I need to perceive them. And when I started to know that what was helpful wasn't a deep dive into theology for most people, but it was actually a conversation about story and about situations and about hurt and healing and forgiveness and all that kind of stuff. The conversations changed and I became much more comfortable with them, and they were much more well received.
Yeah. I wonder if there's a piece to that, and this kind of wraps into the permission element too. Mm-hmm. Where, cause you mentioned that this idea that, if somebody avoids the conversation, maybe that's a cutting off of permission. I also think that there's another element to that where it's, if somebody is maybe aggressive in how they respond with questions or interrogation or something to that level. And I think everyone's been, or at least you've seen it. You've probably seen a video of somebody doing this, or maybe you've experienced it yourself where somebody just came at you with lots of, just daggers, right? That may be its own type of, hey, I may have permission to talk about this, but I think there's a self-realization of like, what's going to be beneficial. And I don't know if anybody has ever argued their way into somebody following Jesus. Maybe it's happened. I'm sure God has used everything, right? But I know in my life that has never happened for me. And I've never talked to somebody who's been argued into faith. I've never talked to somebody who's argued someone into faith. And I think that I've heard people share, I'll call them gotcha stories, where they shared something that a person then didn't have a response for. And that doesn't necessarily mean that person was gotcha'd into faith. Which, so.
So what I heard you say at the beginning of that was, hey, what if somebody comes back aggressively at you?
Yeah.
I think that's a really great question because it happens. And I think the pressure of being a follower of Jesus is that somehow I have to defend Jesus in the midst of that. That's somehow what I felt as like, I need to have the answers because they need to understand this. And I don't think in that case, if somebody's coming at you hard with different things, I don't think it's them understanding Jesus. I think it's you understanding them. And so some of the things that I'll do is, if somebody comes back at me and really goes after it, after I've kind of like mentally go, oh, there's something happening here, which sometimes happens later than it should. But I'll say, well, that's interesting. Tell me more. Yeah. And if they keep going, and there's another strategy too. If somebody makes a definitive statement, there's a negotiating book. I can't remember what the name of it is right now, but the guy talks about it. He goes, take the last 2 or 3 words of their statement and say them verbatim as a question. And what you will find is that that person will continue clarifying and clarifying and clarifying. And I think what you'll find is when somebody is aggressive towards a person of faith, they really don't have a problem with God. They have a problem with what they think God did or didn't do, or what somebody that represented God did or didn't do. And I think so, asking questions and saying, instead of me feeling like I need to defend or have answers, if I just say, you're actually not trying to know more about God, so whatever I say is not going to help. I actually just need to get to know more about you, and do it in such a way that's not condescending, but actually curious, and just saying, that's an interesting statement. Would you tell me more? Where did you hear that? Could you say that another way? Something like that. Suddenly you start to have a different conversation.
Yeah. It's almost, it's like changing the framework of the conversation to where it's no longer about winning with the evidence that you provide. And that's not to say, and let me just real quick caveat, that's not to say that there aren't legitimate responses and answers to questions that may be helpful for somebody to hear. I think what you're saying, what I'm saying, is that the perfect answer may not be helpful for them in that moment.
Yeah.
The right answer is listening to them and hearing their perspective, and working through those things to help almost even them wrestle through the questions that they're asking.
I picture a little bit of like when my son comes in and he has fallen down on the basketball court outside and he's skinned his knee, and I could sit there and explain to him all the things that need to happen for his knee to repair itself. Hey, first we're going to put, peroxide on it, and then we're going to put Neosporin, and then he just needs a hug. He needs to be seen and heard at that moment, because there's something that's bothering him. And I think that sometimes when we look at people and we say, hey, I think you need to be seen and heard and cared about in this moment, and then let's see where it goes from there, it can always be helpful. Yeah.
Okay. So, all right, switching gears a little bit here, and it's kind of in the same vein, right? But it's almost, we just talked about the person themselves that you're trying to talk to, God, about them being aggressive. But I also know there's this other flip side, right? Where maybe hesitation that somebody has with sharing, or how they shared in the past and don't want to do again, is where they've been pushy or awkward or weird about the way that they've talked about faith. How do you share your faith? How do you talk to people about your faith in a way that isn't pushy and weird, and really doesn't cause the other person to become uncomfortable, but causes them to lean in?
I think if there's a genuine openness in the conversation, which is my assumption from your question, I think that when you talk about your story, your journey, and I mean, we talk around here of something like the 15-second transformation story. Before Jesus, I was anxious and I was combative. And after I met Jesus, I feel much more peaceful, and I'm much more willing to lean into relationship. Okay, there's some simple things that our story can teach. And for my story to be able to say, hey, I made a decision to follow Jesus when I was a kid, when I was 4 years old, but it really didn't become real until I was in college, and I realized all that it would entail, and I started to really dig into what does it mean to commit to a lifestyle of following Jesus. And there's a lot of people who can identify to our stories. Hey, I feel like maybe I got moved into something when I was a kid. It became more real. And then once you say, hey, there was space, I didn't just decide to follow Jesus, and then, the Shekinah glory came down and I was floating on air and I had a halo and all the different things. When you say, hey, I've had a struggle, I've gone from different things to different things, and it's not perfect, but it's become much more real. Then I think when you talk with your story, and then if they say, well, how does that work? And then you know how to express the basics of, hey, God didn't create the world full of sin. There's a brokenness that happens, and we try to fix our brokenness on our own. And when we say, God, I'm going to give you control of helping fix my brokenness, and I actually put you at the center, and I believe that who you are is who you say you are is who you are. There's an ease to that where somebody can say, sounds like it worked in your story. I don't know if it'll work in mine, but I have enough to go on.
Yeah. What's interesting is that the people who are, I don't want to say most effective, but most willing to share their story are people who have just made a decision to follow Jesus, are statistically the most frequently the ones to share their faith. And I think most frequently to have people join them in that journey. Statistically, at least that's what the stats say, right? And I don't think there's a coincidence that it's somebody who's made a decision. They're excited about their decision. They've just experienced the life change that comes with making a decision to follow Jesus. And they maybe don't have all of the textbook, like school knowledge that, that you and I both, we did the schooling. So we're not ragging on that. But what they know the most important pieces, and they're not bogged down by, theological fights or any of those types of elements.
Well, there's a story of scripture where the guy gets asked about, what's going on. And he goes, I don't know. All I know is that I was blind and now I can see. And I think when we say to people, hey, I can't tell you every little theological nuance, but what I can tell you is I'm a different person and this isn't by accident. And I think story speaks powerfully.
Yeah. Well, hey, I think there's probably 1,000 different questions that I could ask on this. But we've touched about a lot of different aspects in this conversation, but maybe just could you speak to the person who they love Jesus, they've made a decision to follow him, but they're just terrified to talk about it with somebody. What encouragement would you give them?
I would say first, you're normal. Very few people that talk about their faith well with others don't have a little hesitation. The ones who don't have a hesitation are steamrolling others most likely. But in the end, what I would say is telling other people about your faith is actually a privilege that we're given. I mean, when Jesus talked to his disciples, he just said, go and make disciples. And so we get the opportunity to say, this is how my life was changed. It could change yours. And it can be scary if you feel like you have to do it at a certain frequency or in a certain way. And what I would tell you to do is ask God to give you the opportunity and ask the Holy Spirit to give you the words. And I know that sounds super spiritual and way churchy, but if we believe it, we believe it. If I believe that God's going to do something that would, benefit me as his follower, benefit someone who's not a follower, and move his kingdom forward, which I believe he's all about those things, then why wouldn't he give me the opportunity? And then if we believe that the Holy Spirit works in and through us in ways that we can't even imagine, why would we not ask the Holy Spirit to give us the words? And then I would tell you, after you're done, you're always going to look back and go, oh gosh, I did that really poorly. and I would say, be kind to yourself. Be kind to yourself. Your job is not to be perfect. Your job is not to be spot on every bit of theology. Your job is to be faithful and open. And if you're faithful and open, I think that when we do our part, God does his. And I say that in all sorts of different situations, but when we put our effort forward, he surrounds our effort and does what we can't do on our own. And so I think those are the things that I would tell somebody that's terrified is have courage, because you don't have to do it alone, but don't just run to the spot without having talked to God about it first and ask the Holy Spirit to be part of it.
Man, my mind goes back, Brodie, to when I was in high school and I was sharing my faith with somebody.
Way back.
Yeah, way back. Yeah. Longer than my baby face would suggest, probably. I remember sharing my faith with somebody, and I definitely did not do it in a helpful way. At least I thought. And probably not the most effective way to do it, because they didn't make a decision to follow Jesus in that moment. But then a couple of years later, they did. And it wasn't me that led them to that conversation. It was somebody else, and I think I share that for two reasons. One, quote, you could say that I failed in my sharing. And maybe I did, but that person, but it wasn't riding on just me. Like, I was going to reach that person, and maybe I didn't. And I was the stepping stone for a little bit of something and a little bit of story and a little bit of belief that helped later on in the way. And so, I think you're dead on with this idea of even if you leave the conversation and you felt like, oh, I could have done a better job. Yeah, sure. Learn more about your story. Think more about that. Maybe learn some answers to some questions that somebody might have and how to talk it, and dive into the year one resources that we have on our site. Shameless plug there. But also know that it's not you doing it. It's God working through you and letting that really speak out and speak for itself too. So,
yeah, I think that's the confidence that we have, that we don't do it on our own. And there isn't anything that we can say that will make them be a follower of Jesus. And there isn't anything that we can say that can get in the way if he wants it to happen.
Yeah. Hey, as we wrap up here, any resources plugs that you wanna share that the team's been working on?
Well, yeah, I would tell you first, just what you said a second ago, to go out to the year one page and go through the modules. I mean, there's some videos there that not only talk about the heart of God for people who don't follow him, but actually some tools that would give you the ability to go, oh, I can step in with just a little bit more confidence, a little bit more knowledge. I'm a little bit more prepared. And so there's some simple videos. They're 7 or 8 minutes a piece, I think, and they can just give you a starting point so you can step forward with confidence. But what I'll say is, if you prepare and you prepare and you prepare and you prepare and you never do anything, then it really didn't help you or anybody else. And so have courage. Take the resources that you have, take the things available to you, and then do not fear. Don't be afraid. Go give it a shot and see what God does with it.
Love that. Thank you so much, Brodie. Thanks for sharing. Thanks for chatting about this. And yeah, thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Well, that was my conversation with Brodie, and just 2 quick things to share. One, I really do appreciate the idea of sharing your story with someone and having it short and concise. Hey, here's how Jesus changed my life, because that really is the most impactful thing you can do, is sharing that in a moment in which you have the relationship and the permission to share with them so that it can be heard by them. The second thing that I would just recommend is head over to theridgecc.com/year1. We got a module there, like Brodie mentioned right at the end, where there's a 3-video course that you can just take a quick quiz on each video and just learn a little bit more, get a little bit more tools to help invest in somebody, to help them experience the hope of Jesus. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Ridge Podcast, and make sure you like and subscribe so you don't miss any hopeful and helpful conversations.